Are those my children?
I don't know. Don't ask me.
The divorce was supposed to last 15 minutes. No witnesses. No drama. Just signatures and silence. The Korean billionaire sat in the courtroom checking his watch, calculating how much this interruption was costing him per minute. His lawyers had assured him this was a formality. The prenup was airtight. She had no money. No representation. No leverage. She'd already signed the preliminary documents 3 months ago. This was just the final step. The official erasure of a marriage he'd stopped acknowledging long before the paperwork began. He barely remembered what she looked like anymore. Hadn't seen her since she'd walked out of the mansion 14 months ago without explanation, without fight, without the dramatic scene he'd been bracing for. She just left. Quietly. Like she'd finally accepted what he'd been telling her for years. That she didn't matter. That she was replaceable. That walking away from him meant walking away from everything because without his name, without his money, without his world, she was nothing. He'd moved on immediately. New projects. New acquisitions. New women who understood that his time was valuable and didn't waste it with emotional demands. The marriage had been a mistake. A brief lapse in judgment. Something that happened when you were young enough to confuse attraction with compatibility. But mistakes could be corrected. Erased. Made to disappear as if they never existed. That's what today was. The final correction. Then the courtroom doors opened. And time stopped. She walked in slowly. Not the broken woman he'd expected. Not trembling or crying or making a scene. Just walking. Steady. Deliberate. Head high. And in her arms, wrapped in blankets that looked hand-stitched and too thin for the weather outside, were 2 babies. Newborns. Small enough that they couldn't be more than weeks old. The billionaire's brain refused to process what he was seeing. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Whispered something urgent that sounded like static. The judge looked up from paperwork. The court reporter's hands froze over the keys. And the woman he thought he'd erased stood in the center of the courtroom holding 2 lives he didn't know existed. 2 faces he'd never seen. 2 heartbeats that were about to destroy everything he'd built. Because in that moment, he realized something that made his carefully controlled world crack down the center. This divorce wasn't the end of his marriage. It was the beginning of consequences he'd never prepared for. Subscribe right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Because what you're about to witness over the next 40 minutes isn't just a divorce. It's the complete unraveling of a man who believed power meant he could erase people from his life without consequences. Some secrets don't stay buried. They grow. And when they walk into a courtroom, they destroy everything. Jae-won Park was a man who understood control the way some people understood breathing. Instinctively. Completely. Without thinking about it. At 36 years old, he built an empire that spanned 3 continents. Technology. Real estate. Venture capital. His name appeared in Forbes articles and business school case studies. His decisions moved markets. When he spoke, people listened. When he wanted something, it appeared. And when he wanted something gone, it disappeared. The marriage had been one of those things that needed to disappear. He'd scheduled the divorce the same way he scheduled quarterly earnings calls. Efficiently. With minimal disruption to his actual priorities. His head attorney, Michael Kong, had handled everything. The paperwork. The prenuptial agreement enforcement. The asset protection. Jae-won had barely needed to be involved beyond signing where indicated and showing up today for the final court appearance. He sat in the defendant's chair wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, scrolling through emails on his phone. A merger in Singapore needed his attention. A property acquisition in Dubai was moving forward. The Seoul office had questions about a new hire. Real things. Important things. This divorce was just administrative cleanup. His wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Soo-jin, had already signed everything 3 months ago. The preliminary documents. The acknowledgement that she had no claim to his assets acquired before or during the marriage. The agreement that she would receive exactly what the prenup specified, which was essentially nothing beyond what she'd brought into the marriage, which was also essentially nothing. She'd come from a middle-class family. Teachers. Modest income. No connections. She'd been working as a translator when they met at a conference 5 years ago. Pretty. Intelligent enough. Good at languages. He'd been charmed initially by her simplicity. By the fact that she didn't seem to want anything from him beyond his time. That novelty had lasted approximately 8 months into the marriage. Then reality set in. She wanted things he couldn't give. Attention. Emotional availability. Conversations that weren't about business. Weekends spent doing nothing productive. She'd wanted him to be present in ways that felt like wasting time he could be using to build something. When he'd explained that his work was important, that providing for them meant sacrificing personal time, she'd called him cold. Distant. Said he treated her like an employee rather than a wife. He tried to be patient. Tried to explain that this was who he was. That she'd known what she was marrying. That if she wanted someone who'd spend evenings watching television and weekends at parks, she should have married a teacher like her parents. The fights had escalated. She'd started crying more. Started making demands. Started threatening to leave if things didn't change. He'd called her bluff. Told her the door was always open. Told her she was welcome to walk away, but she'd be walking away from everything. From the lifestyle. From the security. From the only value she had, which was being his wife. She'd stayed. For a while. Got quieter. Stopped fighting. He'd thought that meant she'd finally understood. Finally accepted the terms of their arrangement. Then one morning 14 months ago, he'd come home from a business trip to Tokyo and found her gone. No note. No explanation. Just empty closets and a wedding ring on the kitchen counter. He'd been annoyed more than hurt. Annoyed that she'd chosen drama over discussion. That she'd left without properly ending things. His lawyers had tracked her down within a week. Served her divorce papers. She'd signed them without contest. Without asking for anything. Without even requesting alimony, which the prenup would have denied anyway, but most people at least tried. Michael had called it the easiest divorce he'd ever processed. No custody issues because there were no children. No asset disputes because the prenup was clear. No maintenance. Because she'd signed away that right. Just a clean break. A marriage erased as if it had never happened. That had been 3 months ago. Today was supposed to be the final step. The judge's signature. The official decree. The legal confirmation that J1 Park was once again a single man, free to move forward without the burden of a wife who didn't understand that success required sacrifice. He glanced at his watch. 9:58. The hearing was scheduled for 10. She was late. Typical. Even now, even in this final moment, she couldn't manage to be punctual. Michael leaned over. She's not coming. What? Michael kept his voice low. I got a message from the court clerk. She's not coming. She already signed everything. The judge can finalize without her presence. J1 nodded. Even better. Faster. He could be back in the office by 10:30. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Chen, entered through the side door. Everyone stood. She sat. Gestured for them to sit as well. Shuffled papers on her desk. Before we proceed, she said, looking up over reading glasses, I want to confirm that the respondent, Sujin Park, has been properly notified of today's hearing. She has, Your Honor. Michael stood slightly. She signed acknowledgement of the date and time. She's chosen not to appear. Judge Chen nodded. Made a note. Very well. Then let's. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. And J1's entire world stopped. She looked different. That was his first thought. Not worse. Not better. Just different. Thinner. Her face had lost the softness, he remembered. Sharper cheekbones. Darker circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a coat that had seen better days, the kind you bought from a discount store because it was functional rather than fashionable. Nothing like the designer clothes that had filled her closet when she lived in his house. But it wasn't her appearance that made time stop. It was what she was carrying. 2 babies. Impossibly small. Wrapped in blankets that looked hand-knitted, slightly uneven stitches visible even from across the room. One in each arm, held carefully, protectively, like she was carrying the most precious cargo in the world. J1's brain short-circuited. Tried to process. Failed. Babies. 2 of them. Here. In his divorce hearing. His lawyer's hand clamped onto his forearm. Hard enough to hurt. He heard Michael's breath catch. Heard the sharp intake that meant something had just gone catastrophically wrong. The judge had stood up. Was staring. The court reporter had stopped typing. Complete silence. Sujin walked forward slowly. Not hesitant. Not apologetic. Just careful. Moving like someone who'd learned that every step mattered. That mistakes had consequences. She reached the respondent's table. Set down a worn canvas bag that looked like it had been used as a diaper bag. Kept the babies in her arms. One started making small noises. Not crying. Just the little sounds newborns made. Sujin adjusted her hold. Rocked slightly. The sound stopped. Your Honor, she said. Her voice was quiet but steady.
I had no choice. They
I
were in danger.
apologize for being
This
late.
is insane. Danger from
Getting
what?
2
I'll
infants
explain
ready
later.
takes
What is the
longer than
meaning
I
of this?
anticipated.
I had no choice.
Judge
They were
Chin
in danger.
was still standing.
This is insane. Danger
Still
from
staring.
what? I'll explain later.
Ms. Park. Those are. Yes, Your Honor. They're my children. J1 felt the room tilt. Felt his carefully controlled world sliding sideways. Children. Her children. He looked at them. Really looked. They were tiny. Couldn't be more than a few weeks old. Maybe a month at most. One was sleeping. The other had its eyes barely open, unfocused the way newborn eyes were. Ms. Park, the judge's voice had changed. Gained a sharpness that made J1's survival instincts start screaming. Are these children related to this proceeding? They are, Your Honor. They're my husband's children. The word husband hit like a physical blow. J1 stood up. Didn't remember deciding to stand. Just found himself on his feet. That's not, he started. Sujin looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since entering. Her eyes were empty. Not angry. Not sad. Just empty. Like she was looking at a stranger. Michael pulled him back down into his seat. Whispered urgently. Don't say anything. Don't speak. Let me handle this. But J1 couldn't look away from the babies. From their small faces. From the blankets wrapped around them. From the way Sujin held them like they were the only thing in the world that mattered. Judge Chin sat down slowly. Her expression had shifted from administrative to intensely focused. Ms. Park, I'm going to need you to clarify. Are you stating that your husband, she glanced at the paperwork, Mr. J1 Park, is the biological father of these children? Yes, Your Honor. When were they born? 3 weeks ago. The room spun. 3 weeks. J1's mind raced backward. Doing math. Timeline. 14 months since she left. Minus 3 weeks. That meant conception would have been. Right before she left. Right before she disappeared. Right before she'd walked away without explanation. His lawyer was shuffling papers frantically. Whispering to an associate who'd appeared from nowhere. The judge was making notes. And Sujin just stood there. Holding 2 babies. Waiting. Not defending. Not explaining. Just existing in the space she'd chosen to occupy. Your Honor, Michael stood up. Voice professionally calm but with an edge that said he was in crisis management mode. This is highly irregular. We had no notification of any pregnancy. No claim of paternity. No, because I didn't tell him. Sujin's voice cut through the legal terminology. I found out I was pregnant after I left. And I chose not to inform him. The judge's eyebrows rose. That's quite a significant decision, Ms. Park. Yes, Your Honor. It was. Why? Sujin looked at Jaewon again. And this time there was something in her eyes. Not anger. Something colder. Because the last time we spoke, he told me that if I ever tried to take anything from him, he would destroy me. So I decided not to take anything. Including his awareness that these children existed. The courtroom went completely silent. Jaewon felt every eye turned toward him. Felt judgment settling over him like a physical weight. He hadn't said that. Had he? He tried to remember. Tried to recall their last real conversation. Before she left. When she'd been crying again. Making demands. Threatening to leave unless he changed. He'd been frustrated. Exhausted. Had told her she was being dramatic. Had told her she had nothing. Was nothing without him. Had told her. Oh God. He had said that. Maybe not those exact words. But close enough that it didn't matter. They'd met at a conference in Seoul. International Business Summit. Jaewon had been a keynote speaker. 20-minute presentation on disruptive technology and emerging markets. He'd been 31. Already successful. Already building the empire that would define his life. Sujin had been working as a translator. Fluent in Korean, English, and Mandarin. Hired by the conference organizers to help facilitate international communications. They'd met at the cocktail hour afterward. He'd been surrounded by people wanting his attention. Business cards. Investment pitches. The usual parasites who appeared whenever money was in the room. She'd been standing by the bar, alone, reading something on her phone. Not networking. Not performing. Just existing in her own space. He'd found that refreshing. Had approached her. Asked what she was reading. She looked up, startled, then smiled. Poetry. Kim Sol. He'd been charmed. Someone at a business conference reading classical Korean poetry. Someone who wasn't trying to sell him anything. They talked for an hour. About literature. About language. About the difference between translating words and translating meaning. She'd been intelligent without being aggressive about it. Interesting without trying to impress him. Beautiful in a natural way that didn't require effort. He'd asked for her number. She'd hesitated. Then given it to him. Their first date was coffee. Second was dinner. Third was a weekend in Jeju Island where they'd walked on beaches and talked about everything except business. He'd told her about his childhood. Growing up poor. Father who worked 3 jobs. Mother who cleaned houses. The way he'd clawed his way into university on scholarships. The way he'd built his first company with money borrowed from people who'd expected him to fail. She told him about her family. 2 teachers who'd raised her and her younger brother in a small apartment in Incheon. About loving languages because they were puzzles. About wanting to travel but never having the money. About dreams that felt too big for the life she'd been born into. He'd fallen in love with her simplicity. With the fact that she didn't want anything from him except his time. They'd married 8 months later. Small ceremony. Her family. A few of his business associates. No media. No spectacle. Just vows and rings and a promise to build something together. The first 6 months were good. Better than good. She'd moved into his penthouse. Quit her translation job because he told her she didn't need to work. That he made more than enough for both of them. That she should focus on being happy. She'd started painting. Something she'd loved as a child but abandoned because it wasn't practical. She'd turned one of the spare rooms into a studio. Filled it with canvases and brushes and the smell of oil paint. He'd loved coming home to find her covered in colors. Smiling. Present. But business grew. His company expanded into new markets. More travel. More meetings. More nights spent in hotel rooms in cities whose names blurred together. He'd miss dinner. Miss weekends. Miss moments he'd promised to be present for. She'd been understanding at first. Supportive. Telling him she knew his work was important. That she was proud of him. That she could handle the loneliness as long as it was temporary. But it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. His work wasn't a phase. It was his identity. And slowly, inevitably, she'd started to crack. She'd asked him to come home for her birthday. He'd miss it for a board meeting. She'd plan a weekend getaway. He'd cancel for a merger negotiation. She'd try to talk to him about her day. He'd be on his phone responding to emails. The fights started small. Gentle requests that he be more present. He'd agree. Promise to do better. Then immediately forget because something more important would come up. The fights got bigger. She'd cry. Tell him she felt invisible. That he treated the houseplants with more attention than he gave her. That she'd married a man who'd promised partnership but delivered isolation. He'd get defensive. Tell her she was being unreasonable. That providing for them meant sacrifice. That if she wanted someone who'd sit around wasting time, she'd married the wrong person. She'd apologize. Try to explain she wasn't asking him to quit his job. Just to remember she existed. He'd tell her she was being emotional. Dramatic. That she needed to understand how the real world worked. The cycle repeated. Request. Promise. Neglect. Fight. Apology. Repeat. She stopped painting. The studio gathered dust. She stopped asking him to be present. Stopped planning things. Stopped trying. He thought that meant she'd adjusted. Accepted reality. Matured into understanding that this was what marriage to a successful man looked like. He didn't see her disappearing. Didn't notice the way she started spending more time alone. Started taking long walks. Started looking at him with eyes that had stopped expecting anything. One night, about 6 months before she left, she tried one last time. He'd come home at midnight from a business dinner. Found her waiting in the living room. We need to talk. He'd been exhausted. Had 2 conference calls scheduled for early morning. Didn't have energy for whatever emotional crisis she was manufacturing. Can it wait? No. She'd stood up. Looked at him with something desperate in her eyes. It can't. I need you to hear me. I'm here. Talk. I'm lonely, J1. I'm so lonely I can't breathe sometimes. I wake up in a bed next to someone who treats me like furniture. I spend days in this apartment alone. I eat dinner by myself. I go to bed by myself. And when you are here, you're not really here. You're on your phone or thinking about work, or just waiting for me to stop talking so you can leave again. He'd sighed. We've had this conversation. I know we have. And nothing changes. Because I don't know how to change what you're asking. You're asking me to be someone I'm not. I'm asking you to remember I exist. You exist. You live in a penthouse. You have credit cards with no limits. You have a life most people dream about. I have things, J1. I don't have you. She'd started crying. That quiet crying that was somehow worse than screaming. I don't want your money. I don't want designer clothes or expensive dinners or any of it. I want my husband. I want the man who spent a weekend in Jeju telling me about his dreams. I want the person who used to look at me like I mattered. He'd felt his patience snap. This is who I am. This has always been who I am. You knew what you were marrying. You knew I was building something. If that's not enough for you, if I'm not enough for you, then maybe you should leave. The words had hung in the air. Cold. Final. She'd stared at him. And something in her expression had died. Okay. What? Okay. If that's what you want, I'll leave. I didn't say you did. You just did. And honestly, I think you've been saying it for years. I just wasn't listening. She'd walked past him. Gone to the bedroom. He'd stood there thinking she was being dramatic. That she'd cool off. That tomorrow they'd talk and she'd apologize and things would go back to normal. He'd gone to his office. Worked until 3 in the morning. Slept on the couch. When he woke up, she was gone. He thought she'd come back. That she was making a point. Teaching him a lesson. That she'd realize how good she had it and return apologizing. She never did. And he'd convinced himself that meant he'd been right. That she'd been the problem. That her leaving proved she never understood what it took to succeed. That he was better off without someone who dragged him down with emotional demands. Now, standing in a courtroom looking at a woman holding 2 babies, he understood something that made his chest tight. She hadn't left because she was weak. She'd left because staying was killing her. And he'd been the one holding the knife. Sujin had discovered she was pregnant 6 weeks after she left. She'd been living in a women's shelter. Small room. Shared bathroom. Meals that came from donations and government programs. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling like she was disappointing someone just by existing. The nausea started gradually. She'd thought it was stress. Anxiety from the upheaval. Her body adjusting to freedom. But when it didn't stop after 2 weeks, when she started feeling dizzy and exhausted in ways that felt wrong, she'd gone to a free clinic. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and hands that had seen too much poverty. She'd done the examination. Asked questions. Drawn blood. Told Sujin to come back in 3 days for results. Sujin had known before the results came back. Had felt it in her body. In the way everything felt different. Wrong. Changed. The doctor had confirmed it gently. You're pregnant. About 8 weeks. The words had hit like a physical blow. Pregnant. With Jaewon's child. With the child of a man she just escaped. The doctor had given her information. About options. About clinics. About support services. Had told her she didn't have to decide immediately. That she could take time. Sujin had left the clinic in a daze. Walked for hours through streets she didn't know. Ended up in a park sitting on a bench watching children play. Trying to imagine. Trying to decide. Part of her wanted to call him. To tell him. To give him the chance to be involved. But then she remembered. Remembered the last conversation. The cold dismissal. The threat. If you try to take anything from me, I will destroy you. She'd left taking nothing. Had signed the preliminary divorce papers without asking for alimony. Without requesting anything. Had walked away clean because staying would have killed something essential in her. But a baby changed everything. A baby was a permanent connection. A legal claim. Something he could control. Something he could use against her. She'd thought about termination. Seriously. Practically. She had no money. No job. No support system. How could she raise a child alone? But every time she tried to make the appointment, something stopped her. Not morality. Not religion. Just the understanding that this child was hers. That for once in her life, she had something that was completely, entirely hers. Something Jaewon couldn't claim. Couldn't control. Couldn't take away. So she decided to keep it. To disappear completely. To rebuild a life where he would never find her. Never know. Never be able to use this child the way he'd used everything else in their marriage. She'd left the shelter. Too risky. Too easy to track. Had found a room for rent in a house 3 hours outside Seoul. Paid cash. Used her mother's maiden name. Got a job cleaning houses that didn't ask for documentation or references. It was hard work. Physical. Exhausting. But it was hers. And it didn't require her to pretend to be anything she wasn't. The pregnancy progressed. She went to prenatal appointments at a community health center. Free care for women without insurance. The nurses were overworked but kind. They taught her about nutrition. About what to expect. About warning signs. At the 12-week ultrasound, the technician had gone quiet. Called in a doctor. Sujin's heart had stopped. Something wrong. Something terrible. But the doctor had smiled. Nothing wrong. Just, there are 2. What? 2 babies. Twins. You're having twins. The room had spun. Twins. 2 children. 2 lives depending on her. The impossibility of it crashed over her like a wave. 1 child seemed manageable. Difficult but possible. But 2? How would she work? How would she afford childcare? How would she survive? She'd gone back to her rented room. Sat on the floor. Let herself cry for the first time since leaving J1. Big, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. Then she dried her eyes. Made a plan. She worked until her body couldn't anymore. Until she was 7 months pregnant. And couldn't bend over to clean floors. Saved every dollar. Every coin. Bought nothing that wasn't essential. The landlady, an older woman named Mrs. Kim, had figured it out eventually. Seen Sujin's growing belly. The way she moved carefully. The exhaustion. She knocked on Sujin's door one evening. Brought soup. Sat down without being invited. You're alone. It wasn't a question. Yes. The father? Gone. Mrs. Kim had nodded. Like she'd heard this story 1,000 times. You have family? Not anymore. Another nod. You can stay here. After the babies come. I'll watch them while you work. You'll pay me back when you can. Sujin had cried again. Thank you? Mrs. Kim had patted her hand. Women help women. That's how we survive. Labor started at 37 weeks. 2 in the morning. Contractions that made her gasp. Mrs. Kim had driven her to the public hospital. Stayed with her. Held her hand. Sujin had labored for 19 hours. No epidural because she couldn't afford it. No private room. Just a curtained section of a ward where she could hear other women screaming. The pain was biblical. Beyond anything she'd imagined. She gripped Mrs. Kim's hand and sobbed. Begged for it to stop. Begged for anything that would make it end. Mrs. Kim had stayed. Had whispered encouragement. Had told her she was strong. That she could do this. The first baby came at 9:23 in the evening. A girl. Small. Crying. Perfect. They'd put her on Sujin's chest for 30 seconds. Then took her away because the second baby was coming. The second arrived 11 minutes later. Another girl. Smaller than the first. Quiet. Too quiet. Sujin had panicked. Is she okay? Is she breathing? The doctors had worked quickly. Efficiently. Then the baby cried. Weak but present. She's fine. Just small. They'll both need to stay in the NICU for a few days. But they're fighters. Sujin had held them both eventually. In the recovery room. 2 tiny humans. Her daughters. And she'd made them a promise. I will protect you. From everything. From everyone. Even from your father. Especially from your father. She named them alone. No one to consult. No one to argue with. Just her decision. Jiwoo. Meaning wisdom and universe. Mi-sun. Meaning beauty and goodness. Names that meant something. Names their father would never say. The hospital had asked about the birth certificate. About the father's name. She'd left it blank. They'd warned her that might complicate things later. She'd signed anyway. 3 weeks in the NICU. 3 weeks of pumping breast milk and taking buses to the hospital and sitting beside plastic incubators watching her daughters breathe. 3 weeks of terror that something would go wrong. That they'd get sick. That she'd lose them before she really had them. But they'd survived. Thrived. Gotten strong enough to come home. Mrs. Kim had helped set up the room. 2 bassinets donated from a church. Clothes from a charity shop. Formula because Sujin's milk hadn't come in properly from stress and malnutrition. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Then the divorce papers had arrived. Final hearing scheduled. She'd stared at them for days. Trying to decide. She could ignore them. Let him finalize everything without her. Disappear completely. Raise the girls in anonymity. Never let him know they existed. Or she could do something that terrified her. She could show up. Not for revenge. Not for money. But for the one thing she needed that only a courtroom could provide. Legal acknowledgement. On record. Witnesses. Proof that these children existed. That they were his. That if anything happened to her, there would be documentation. Protection. So she'd made a choice. She'd walked into that courtroom carrying 2 3-week-old babies. And she'd watched her husband's world begin to collapse. If you're still here, type "I'm still watching" in the comments. Because what happens next will show you that some secrets don't stay buried. Some consequences can't be controlled. And some women are far more dangerous than powerful men ever realize. Sujin had spent 2 weeks planning this moment. Not planning what to say. Not rehearsing speeches. Just planning the logistics of getting 2 newborns to a courthouse 3 hours away without everything falling apart. Mrs. Kim had helped. Had offered to watch the babies so Sujin could go alone. But Sujin had refused. They need to be there. They need to be seen. Why? Mrs. Kim had asked. Why put yourself through that? Because if I don't, they don't exist. Not legally. Not officially. And if something happens to me, there's no record. No proof. No protection. But he'll fight you. He has money. Lawyers. He'll try to take them. Let him try. Sujin's voice had been quiet but absolute. Let him explain to a judge why he didn't know his own children existed. Let him explain why his wife disappeared pregnant and alone. Let him stand in front of witnesses and pretend he's the victim. Mrs. Kim had studied her. You're not doing this for money. No. For custody? No. I don't want his involvement. I don't want his money. I don't want anything from him. Then why? For the record. Sujin had looked at the sleeping babies. For proof. Because men like him rewrite history. They erase people. They make inconvenient truths disappear. And I need these girls to exist in a way he can't erase. Even if he never acknowledges them. Even if he never sees them again. I need a legal record that says they're his. That I didn't just appear with children. That this happened. That he's responsible. Whether he accepts that responsibility or not. She'd researched everything. Family law. Paternity rights. What she could demand versus what she was entitled to. The prenup she'd signed was brutal. Waived alimony. Waived asset claims. Basically stated that in the event of divorce, she left with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage, which was essentially nothing. But prenups didn't cover children. Couldn't cover children. Because children weren't assets. They were human beings with rights independent of their parents' contracts. South Korean law was clear. Biological fathers had obligations. Financial. Legal. Those obligations existed whether the father wanted them or not. Whether he'd been informed or not. She wasn't going to demand custody arrangements. Wasn't going to ask for child support. Wasn't going to request anything. She was just going to make him acknowledge, on legal record, that these children existed. That they were his. That he couldn't pretend otherwise. The courtroom strategy was simple. Show up. Present the babies. Let him react. Let the judge see. Let everything unfold naturally without her needing to perform or explain or justify. The truth would speak for itself. 2 newborns. 3 weeks old. The timeline obvious to anyone who could count. She timed the feeding carefully. Fed them both right before leaving. Changed them. Made sure they were as calm as possible. Brought backup bottles. Diapers. Everything she might need if they started crying. The bus ride had been exhausting. 3 hours with 2 infants. People staring. Offering unwanted advice. Judging silently. She'd ignored all of it. Focused on keeping the girls calm. On breathing through her own anxiety. On remembering why this mattered. The courthouse was intimidating. All marble and authority. People in expensive suits walking with purpose. Security guards. Metal detectors. She'd almost turned around. Almost decided this was too much. Too risky. Then she'd looked at Ji-woo and Mi-sun. At their small faces. At the lives that depended on her being braver than she felt. And she'd walked through those doors. Found the right courtroom. Waited outside until exactly the right moment. She'd heard voices inside. The judge. Lawyers. Jaewon's voice asking when they could start. She'd taken a breath. Adjusted her hold on the babies. And pushed open the door. The look on his face made every difficult moment worth it. Not because she wanted him to suffer. But because she wanted him to see. To understand that his actions had consequences. That you couldn't erase people just because. It was convenient. That some truths refused to stay buried. The judge had called a recess. Ordered everyone to remain in the courtroom but given them 15 minutes while she reviewed documents in her chambers. Jaewon sat frozen. Michael was pacing. Making phone calls. Barking orders at associates. Demanding answers to questions Jaewon couldn't even formulate. Across the room, Soo-jin sat in a chair feeding one of the babies. Bottle. Formula. The other was asleep in what looked like a second-hand stroller. She didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. Just focused on the task of keeping a tiny human fed. Jaewon's mind was racing. Trying to calculate. Trying to find the angle. The explanation that made this make sense. They couldn't be his. The timeline didn't, except it did. 14 months since she left. -3 weeks. -40 weeks for pregnancy. That put conception at, right before she disappeared. Right when they'd had that last fight. He remembered that night. Vaguely. He'd been frustrated. Exhausted. They'd argued. Then later, much later, she'd come to him. Tried to bridge the gap the only way that still worked between them. Physical connection when emotional connection had failed. He'd been half asleep. Had barely participated. But it had happened. Once. Maybe twice in those final weeks. He hadn't thought about it since. Hadn't considered. Hadn't protected. Why would he? She'd been on birth control. Or he'd assumed she was. Had never actually asked? Had just assumed that was something she handled. Michael sat down beside him. Spoke in a low, urgent voice. We need to establish paternity. Can't confirm these children are yours without testing. Jaewon nodded. Okay. Yes. Testing. But Michael continued, if they are yours, we have a problem. The prenup doesn't cover child support. Doesn't cover custody. Doesn't cover any of this. What does that mean? It means you're about to become financially responsible for 2 children whether you want to be or not. It means she has legal grounds to request child support. It means, I don't want custody, Soo-jin's voice cut across the room. Both men looked at her. She was still focused on the baby. Still not looking at them. What? Jaewon found his voice. You don't. I don't want custody arrangements. I don't want visitation schedules. I don't want your involvement in their lives. Then what do you want? Money? Soo-jin finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. Older than he remembered. I want the record to show they exist. That they're yours. That's all. Michael leaned forward. Ms. Park, with all due respect, that doesn't make sense. If you're not requesting child support or custody, I'm not requesting anything. Then why are you here? Because legal acknowledgement protects them. Because if something happens to me, there's a record. Because I won't let him pretend they don't exist. Jaewon felt anger rising. Replacing shock. You disappeared. You left without telling me. You hid this from me. Yes. And now you show up demanding. I'm not demanding anything. You're disrupting this proceeding. This is a divorce proceeding about our marriage. These children are a direct result of that marriage. They're relevant. Michael stood up. Your Honor, when the judge returns, we'll be requesting a paternity test. Of course. Soo-jin's voice was calm. I expected that. I have medical records. Ultrasounds. Birth certificates. The hospital can provide blood samples. Test whatever you need to test. Jaewon stood up. Couldn't sit anymore. Crossed to where she sat. Soo-jin tensed. Held the baby closer. He stopped several feet away. Why? Why what? Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him. Really looked at him. And he saw something in her expression that made his chest tight. Because you told me you'd destroy me if I tried to take anything from you. I didn't, you did. Multiple times. In multiple ways. You made it very clear that leaving you meant leaving with nothing. So I did. I took nothing. Including your knowledge of these children. They're my children. Biologically, yes. But you forfeited any other claim the moment you chose your work. Over basic human decency. That's not. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Chen returned. Carrying a folder that looked ominous. Everyone sat. The judge looked at Jae-won. Then at Soo-jin. Then at the babies. Mr. Park, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you know Ms. Park was pregnant when she left you? No. Did you have any contact with her during the pregnancy? No. And these children, to your knowledge, are they biologically yours? I don't know. We'll need testing. Understood. The judge made notes. Ms. Park, you've stated you discovered the pregnancy after leaving. You've also stated you chose not to inform Mr. Park. Can you explain that decision? Soo-jin adjusted the baby in her arms. In our last conversation, my husband told me that if I tried to take anything from him, he would destroy me. I believed him. I believe him now. So I chose not to take anything. I left with nothing. Asked for nothing. Wanted nothing. Except to be free of a marriage that was slowly killing me. Judge Chen's expression was unreadable. And now? Now I have 2 daughters who deserve to exist legally. Who deserve documentation that they have a father even if that father wants nothing to do with them. I'm not here for money. I'm not here for custody. I'm here so that when these girls are old enough to ask who their father is, I can show them a legal record instead of just my word. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the folder. I've reviewed the preliminary documents. The prenuptial agreement. The asset disclosures. And I've noted several relevant facts. She looked at Jae-won. Mr. Park, you're a wealthy man. Very wealthy. According to these documents, your net worth is substantial. Yes, Your Honor. And this prenuptial agreement, she held it up, essentially leaves your wife with nothing in the event of divorce. That was the agreement, yes. An agreement she signed. Yes. An agreement that, according to the filing dates, was presented to her 72 hours before your wedding. Jae-won's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. That's within legal parameters, Your Honor. Barely. The judge set down the papers. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to order paternity testing. Both children. We're going to continue this proceeding until those results are available. And if those results confirm what I suspect they're going to confirm, we're going to have a very different conversation about what constitutes fair and equitable dissolution of this marriage. Your Honor, Michael stood. The prenup is a contract that didn't account for children, Judge Chen interrupted. Is a contract signed under circumstances I find questionable. And is a contract that, I'm noting for the record, allowed a wealthy man to abandon his pregnant wife without support. Michael's face went red. We had no knowledge. That's the problem, isn't it? The judge's voice was sharp. You had no knowledge because you didn't ask. Because it was easier to process papers than to actually confirm the well-being of the person you were divorcing. She looked at Jae-won. Mr. Park, I'm ordering you to submit to paternity testing within 48 hours. I'm ordering you to remain available for further hearings. And I'm strongly suggesting you speak with your attorney about the implications of what's happening here. Because if those children are yours, and I believe they are, you're about to discover that money doesn't protect you from responsibility. Court is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. She stood. Everyone stood. And Jae-won watched his carefully controlled world continue its collapse. The paternity results came back in 6 days. Not 2 weeks. 6 days. Because Michael had expedited everything. Had called in favors. Had demanded the fastest possible processing. The results were definitive. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Both children. No ambiguity. No room for doubt. J1 stared at the paper. At the numbers. At the official confirmation of something he'd already known the moment he'd seen those babies. They had his eyes. His mouth. Features that would become more obvious as they grew but were already there in miniature. Daughters. He had daughters. 2 of them. The news leaked within hours. Not from his side. Michael's team was too professional. Not from Sujin. She had no interest in publicity. But courtrooms weren't private. Documents were filed. Reporters tracked filings. And a story about a billionaire CEO discovering he had secret twins during his own divorce hearing was too good to ignore. The first article appeared in a business gossip blog. Small. Speculative. Asking questions more than making statements. Within 24 hours it had spread. Business journals. Society pages. International coverage. Headlines that got progressively more damaging. Korean billionaire learns of secret twins during divorce. CEO Jae-won Park faces paternity scandal. Billionaire abandoned pregnant wife. The divorce that exposed everything. His phone started ringing. Board members. Investors. Partners. His PR team demanding statements. His legal team demanding silence. His mother, who he hadn't spoken to in 6 months, demanding answers. He ignored all of it. Sat in his office watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. The company's stock dropped 3% the first day. 7% by the end of the week. Not catastrophic. But significant. A sign that investors were nervous. That the carefully cultivated image of Jae-won Park, family-oriented business leader, was cracking. He'd built his brand partially on that image. Young. Successful. Grounded. The kind of CEO who understood work-life balance even while building an empire. Articles had featured him talking about the importance of family. About learning from his parents' sacrifices. About wanting to build something that would matter to future generations. All of it had been performance. Calculated branding. But people had believed it. Now those same people felt deceived. Betrayed. The corporate partnerships started pulling back. Not canceling. Just postponing. Suggesting they wait until the situation stabilized. Until the optics improved. His speaking engagements were quietly cancelled. Conference organizers citing scheduling conflicts. Everyone being very polite. Very professional. But the message was clear. He'd become toxic. A liability. Someone whose presence might generate the wrong kind of attention. The board called an emergency meeting. 10 executives sitting around a table looking at him with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed anger. "We need to discuss the situation," the chairman said. Situation. Like his daughters were a PR problem to be managed. Jae-won, one of the other board members, leaned forward. "Help us understand. You didn't know your wife was pregnant?" "Ex-wife. And no. I didn't know." "How is that possible?" "She left. Disappeared. I had no contact with her." "And you didn't think to, what? Check on her?" The question hung in the air. Accusatory. He could have defended himself. Could have explained the prenup, the lawyers, the clean break. But sitting there, looking at 10 people judging him, he realized how hollow it sounded. "No. I didn't check on her." The room was silent. "This is damaging the company," someone else said. "Our reputation. Our partnerships. The family-oriented brand we've built." "I understand. Do you? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you abandoned a pregnant woman. Left her to fend for herself while you continued building your empire. And now that it's public, now that people know, we're all paying the price. What do you want me to do? Fix it." "How?" The chairman spoke. "You have daughters now. That's a fact. You can't change it. But you can control the narrative. You can show responsibility. Commitment. You can." "They don't want me involved," Jae-won interrupted. "My ex-wife has made it very clear she wants nothing from me. Not money. Not custody. Nothing. Then give her something anyway. Make a statement. Pledge child support. Establish a trust fund. Do something that makes you look like a father instead of a man who got caught. Jae-won felt bow rising in his throat. So this is about optics. It's about survival. Yours and the company's. You think this is just going away? You think people are just going to forget? You need to take control of this narrative before it destroys everything you've built. The meeting lasted another hour. Strategies. Recommendations. PR campaigns to rehabilitate his image. All of it felt empty. Performative. By the time he left, he understood something that made him feel sick. They were right. He built a reputation on being someone he wasn't. And now that mask was crumbling. Revealing someone he didn't particularly like. Someone who'd prioritized everything except what actually mattered. He went home to an empty penthouse. Sat in the dark. Thought about Soo-jin feeding a baby with formula while sitting in a courtroom. Thought about her living somewhere he'd never seen. Raising 2 daughters he'd never met. Getting by on nothing while he lived in luxury. For the first time in his adult life, Jae-won Park felt ashamed. The second hearing happened 3 weeks later. Same courtroom. Same judge. Different energy. Jae-won arrived with Michael and 2 additional attorneys. Prepared for battle. Ready to negotiate whatever needed negotiating. Soo-jin arrived alone. No babies this time. Mrs. Kim was watching them. She sat in the respondent's chair looking tired. Thinner than before. But steady. Judge Chun reviewed the paternity results. Confirmed what everyone already knew. Then she looked at both parties. We're here to finalize the dissolution of your marriage. But given the new information, we need to address several issues. Child support. Custody arrangements. Visitation rights. Your Honor, Soo-jin stood. If I may. Go ahead, Ms. Park. I don't want child support. The room went still. I don't want custody arrangements. I don't want visitation schedules. I don't want anything except what I came here for. Which is? Legal acknowledgement. On record. That Jae-won Park is the biological father of Ji-woo Park and Mi-sun Park. That they were born on the date recorded. That they exist. The judge frowned. Ms. Park, you understand you're entitled to child support. Under South Korean law, a father has financial obligations, I understand. And I'm declining. You can't decline on behalf of the children. Those are their rights, not yours. Soo-jin's voice was quiet but firm. With respect, Your Honor, I can refuse to pursue those rights. I can choose not to file for support. And that's what I'm choosing. Why? Because I don't want his money. I don't want his involvement. I don't want to spend the next 18 years tied to a man who made it very clear I was disposable. I want to raise my daughters in peace. Without his influence. Without his control. Without owing him anything or giving him any claim to their lives. Michael stood up. Your Honor, this is highly unusual. A mother essentially refusing support, because she knows what that support comes with, Soo-jin interrupted. Conditions. Obligations. Leverage. He'll use money to control access. To demand involvement he never wanted. To turn my daughters into chess pieces in whatever game serves his interests. Judge Chen studied Soo-jin. You understand what you're giving up. Financially, this could mean, I understand. I've done the math. I'll work. I'll manage. I've been managing. And I'd rather struggle honestly than be comfortable under his control. The judge turned to Jae-won. Mr. Park, do you have anything to say? Jae-won had been sitting in silence. Processing. Trying to understand. He stood slowly. I want to help. Soo-jin's laugh was bitter. No, you don't. You want to fix your reputation. I want to take responsibility. You want to manage the optics of a scandal. There's a difference. That's not. The judge held up a hand. Both of you. Stop. She looked at Soo-jin. Ms. Park, I understand your position. I even sympathize with it. But I have an obligation to these children. And I can't in good conscience finalize this divorce without ensuring they're protected. So here's what's going to happen. She pulled out documents. Started writing. I'm going to order Mr. Park to establish a trust fund. Not child support. Not monthly payments that create ongoing obligation. A one-time trust. Substantial. For education. For emergencies. For the future. It will be controlled by a third-party trustee. Not you. Not him. Someone neutral who will ensure the money is there if the children need it. But, and this is important, you're under no obligation to ever access it. It exists as protection. As safety net. Not as control. You can raise your daughters however you choose. Mr. Park will have no claim to custody. No visitation rights unless you explicitly grant them. No involvement whatsoever. But the money will be there. Just in case. Sujin was quiet. Processing. How much? Judge Chen looked at J1's financial disclosure. Based on Mr. Park's assets, I'm ordering a trust of 50 million won per child. J1 didn't flinch. Michael scribbled notes. Sujin's eyes went wide. That's too much. That's what your husband, Judge Chen's voice was sharp, can afford. That's what he owes for abandoning you while pregnant. For never checking on your well-being. For creating a situation where you had to give birth alone and raise infants in poverty while he lived in luxury. This isn't punishment, Mr. Park. It's consequence. J1 nodded. I understand, Your Honor. I'll establish the trust immediately. Good. Judge Chen signed documents. Then she looked at both of them. This marriage is dissolved. You are no longer husband and wife. Mr. Park, you have daughters whether you like it or not. That's a biological fact. What you do with that information is up to you. But you will establish the trust. You will sign away all parental rights. And you will leave Ms. Park and her daughters alone unless explicitly invited otherwise. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Park, you're free to rebuild your life. The trust will be available should you need it. But I hope, for your daughter's sake, you'll consider letting them know their father exists. Not for his sake. For theirs. Every child deserves to know where they came from. Even if where they came from was complicated. Sujin nodded. I'll think about it. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Everyone stood. Sujin gathered her things. Walked toward the door. Jae-won found himself following. Catching her in the hallway. Wait. She turned. Looked at him with eyes that held no warmth. No forgiveness. Just exhaustion. What? I'm sorry. For? Everything. For not seeing you. For taking you for granted. For not being what you needed. For all of it. Sujin was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. I don't forgive you. I don't expect you to. Good. Because forgiveness would require me caring enough about your guilt to absolve it. And I don't. You're just a man I used to know. A mistake I survived. The father of my children only in the biological sense. Her words hit like bullets. Can I meet them? Someday? She studied him. Maybe. When they're old enough to understand. When they can choose for themselves whether they want a relationship with you. But not now. Not while they're small and perfect and mine. Now I need to protect them. Even from you. Especially from you. She walked away. Jae-won stood in the empty hallway. Alone. For the first time in his life feeling the full weight of consequences he couldn't control. Couldn't fix. Couldn't make disappear with money or power or carefully managed PR. He'd lost. Completely. Irrevocably. And the victory he thought he had, the divorce that was supposed to erase a mistake, had instead revealed exactly what kind of man he'd become. 8 months later. Sujin's life had changed in small, significant ways. The trust fund sat untouched. She'd confirmed its existence. Had met with the trustee. Had signed the papers. But she hadn't accessed a single one. Partly from pride. Partly from principle. Mostly because she'd discovered something important. She could do this. Not easily. Not comfortably. But survivably. She'd found work as a translator again. Remote work. Freelance. Companies hiring her to translate documents and websites and marketing materials. She could do it from home. Could work while the babies napped. Could manage her own schedule. It wasn't lucrative. But combined with Mrs. Kim's help, combined with government assistance programs for single mothers, combined with careful budgeting and brutal prioritization, it was enough. The babies were growing. Jiwoo was alert. Curious. Always looking around with eyes that missed nothing. Mi-sun was quieter. More contemplative. But when she smiled, it transformed her entire face. Soo-jin had learned the rhythms of motherhood. The exhaustion. The overwhelming responsibility. The moments of pure terror when one of them got sick or hurt, or just cried for hours for no apparent reason. But she'd also learned the joy. The first smiles. The little sounds they made. The way they recognized her voice. The absolute trust in their eyes when they looked at her. She'd made friends with other mothers at a community center. Women who understood. Who didn't judge. Who traded babysitting hours and hand-me-down clothes and advice about teething and sleep training. Her life was small. Contained. Nothing like the penthouse existence she'd left behind. But it was hers. And for the first time since marrying Jae-won, she could breathe. She saw him once. Accidentally. She'd been walking through a park with the girls in a double stroller. Needed fresh air. Needed to get out of the apartment. He'd been there with what looked like business associates. Walking. Talking. Conducting a meeting in motion. They'd locked eyes across 50 feet of grass. He'd stopped mid-sentence. Stared. She'd kept walking. Didn't speed up. Didn't slow down. Just continued past as if he were any other stranger in a public space. She didn't know if he'd approached. Didn't look back to check. Just kept moving until the park was behind her. That night, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. It's me. Jae-won's voice. I saw you today. I know. The girls, they're beautiful. Yes. I didn't approach because you asked me not to. Thank you? There was a long silence. I think about them. Every day. I think about what I'm missing. That's not my problem. I know. But I wanted you to know. To know what? That I was wrong. That you were right. That I had everything and didn't realize it until it was gone. Soo-jin was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. I didn't call to absolve you of guilt. I didn't call to ask for forgiveness. I wanted you to know I see it now. What you tried to tell me. What I refused to hear. You were dying in that marriage and I called you dramatic. You were drowning and I told you to swim better. Tears were running down Soo-jin's face. But she kept her voice steady. Yes. I'm sorry. I know. But sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't give me back the years I spent invisible. It doesn't erase giving birth alone. It doesn't make you a father to children you've never held. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you understand you lost something. But I don't think you understand what I lost. What it cost me to survive you. His voice was thick. Tell me. No. She said it firmly. You don't get my pain. You don't get my story. You don't get closure or understanding or whatever you're seeking by calling me. What you get is consequence. You get to live with the knowledge that you had a family and destroyed it. That you have daughters who will grow up not knowing you. That you had a woman who loved you and you taught her that love was weakness. That's what you get. She hung up. Turned off her phone. Checked on the sleeping babies. Sat in the dark feeling the weight of everything she'd survived. She didn't forgive him. Might never forgive him. But she didn't hate him anymore either. Hate required energy she needed for other things. For building. For protecting. For loving the two small humans who depended on her. 2 years later. The girls were talking now. Not full sentences, but words. Mama. Hungry. More. No. Their vocabulary expanding daily. Jiwoo was bold. Fearless. Climbing everything. Testing boundaries. Mi-sun was cautious. Thoughtful. Observing before acting. They were perfect. Complicated. Exhausting. Everything. Soo-jin had saved enough to move into a better apartment. 2 bedrooms. A park nearby. Good schools in the district. She'd built a life. Not the life she'd imagined when she was young. Not the life she tried to build with Jaewon. Just a life. Simple. Honest. Hers. The trust fund still sat untouched. But she'd made a decision. When the girls were older, she'd tell them about it. Let them choose what to do with it. Education. Travel. Starting businesses. Whatever they wanted. It was their money. Their father's one contribution to their lives. She'd tell them about him too. Eventually. When they were old enough to understand. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just with truth. Your father is a man who built empires but forgot about people. Who had everything but didn't know how to hold it. Who loved in the only way he knew how, which turned out to be not enough. You came from him. But you're not defined by him. You're defined by yourselves. By the choices you make. By the people you become. And as she watched her daughters play, as she saw them laugh and fight and forgive each other with the resilience only children possessed, she understood something that made peace finally possible. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd built something real from the wreckage. And the man who thought he could erase her had only succeeded in revealing his own emptiness. Some losses were actually freedoms. Some endings were actually beginnings. And some women were stronger than the men who underestimated them ever realized. Jaewon's life changed too. But differently. The business recovered. Eventually. Stocks stabilized. Partnerships resumed. The scandal faded from headlines as newer scandals emerged. But something fundamental had shifted. He stepped back from public appearances. Delegated more. Started therapy because his mother demanded it, and because late at night, alone, he couldn't escape the understanding that something in him was broken. The therapist asked hard questions. About his childhood. About his parents' struggles. About the way poverty had taught him that money was safety, and everything else was luxury. About the way he'd confused success with worth. About the way he'd learned to value productivity over presence. It was painful. Excavating. He learned words for things he'd never named. Emotional unavailability. Avoidant attachment. Workaholism. All the ways he'd protected himself from vulnerability by refusing to be vulnerable at all. He thought about Soo-jin constantly. About the girls. About what they were doing. How they were growing. What they looked like now. He didn't call again. Respected her boundary. But he followed from a distance. Hired a private investigator not to interfere, just to know. To have reports that they were healthy. Safe. Thriving. Every 6 months, an envelope arrived. Photos. Brief updates. Never identifying who sent them. But he knew. Some third party. Maybe Mrs. Kim. Maybe someone Soo-jin had authorized to give him crumbs. He kept the photos in a locked drawer. Looked at them late at night. Watched his daughters grow in frozen moments. First birthdays. First steps. Halloween costumes. Park visits. They looked happy. Soo-jin looked lighter. Younger despite the years. Free in ways she'd never been with him. He'd destroyed her to save her. Except he hadn't destroyed her at all. She'd destroyed the version of herself that had tried to love him. And built something stronger from what remained. On the girl's 3rd birthday, he did something he'd been planning for months. He wrote a letter. Not to Soo-jin. To Jiwoo and Mi-sun. To be opened when they were 18. Explaining. Not justifying. Not asking forgiveness. Just telling them the truth. That he'd been their father in biology but failed to be their father in any way that mattered. That their mother had been braver than he'd ever been. That they came from a man who'd had everything and realized too late that everything meant nothing without people to share it with. He gave the letter to the trustee, with instructions, and a plea. Give this to them when they're old enough. Let them decide if they want to know me. I won't force it. Won't demand. But if they ever ask, I'll be here. He didn't know if they'd ever read it. Didn't know if they'd ever want a relationship. But he owed them the truth. And he owed Sujin the peace of knowing he wouldn't disrupt the life she'd built. Years passed. The girls grew. Sujin thrived. Built a career. Bought a house. Created a life filled with friends and community and love. J1 existed. Successful. Wealthy. Alone. He dated occasionally. Never seriously. Never anyone who lasted. Because he'd learned too late what love required. And he'd forgotten how to give it. Some lessons came too late to matter. Some consequences were permanent. And some men learned that winning meant nothing if you lost everything that actually mattered. He'd erased a woman from his life. And she'd erased him right back. But she'd done it better. More completely. With grace instead of cruelty. She'd taken nothing from him except the illusion that he was powerful. And she'd given him something in return. The understanding that true power wasn't control. It was letting go. Subscribe for more stories where money doesn't equal power. Where consequences can't be controlled. Where women survive the men who tried to erase them and build something beautiful from the wreckage. Some endings aren't defeats. They're freedoms. And some losses teach you what actually matters. Even if the lesson comes too late.